Okay, greetings and welcome to another Ligali Live. We should hopefully be broadcasting live on YouTube. You should be able to hear us okay. As usual, a sound check is always going to be appreciated. I'm flying solo this evening until Oleander comes back. It's quite a jam-packed program. It's quite a lot of information to go through. So I'm going to keep going. I'll keep checking over here to see if there was any comments coming in. So please feel free to join us on the YouTube chat, the live chat, or through the Zoom chat, which I have open up so I can actually take a quick look at the same time. I'm just going to get going because, like I said, there's quite a lot to go through. And the first slide I'm going to talk about is the report, No One's Listening, that was released last week. This is really the summary of an investigation into the condition of sickle cell in the UK. And basically, I'm going to try and avoid saying basically. I think I'll pick that something up from the children. Thank you. We had acknowledgement that you can hear us okay. Much appreciated. So what's happened is that there's an annual sickle, in fact, there's two annual sickle cell days, one in September, I think the other one's in June. My memory is awful. But this inquiry was kind of like put together in the House of Commons with a whole lot of peers, medical professionals, Sickle Cell Society, and it came to quite a few conclusions about the conditions that are faced by African people when it comes to sickle cell. Now, one thing I do want to say about this report before I move on and I just kind of like share some of the highlights is that it's important to recognize that even though this publication was publicized on the day of its launch, so you did hear some comments on the national broadcaster like BBC, I think it was on BBC London. I don't think it was on BBC News, but it was definitely on Channel 4 News. And even though this was actually put together by the House of Lords, it's not been approved. It's not been sanctioned by any of the politicians who are in charge of making law on policy on these issues. So this is a very good piece of work, but it has no political clout. The only thing it does is raise the awareness. And so we can hope that some of the elected parliamentary representatives enact laws, make changes, shift resources. So I want to make that caveat as well, because as much as this is a great piece of work and it's a great inquiry in that sense, it much of what's inside it is really old news to us who live inside the sickle cell community. And let me get into the next slide. So what did it find out? Well, this report really started as a response to the atrocious treatment that was given to Evan Nathan Smith, who passed away in 2019 when he called 999 for an ambulance, and they just didn't really treat his sickle cell seriously enough. And the worst case scenario was that he was in a crisis and they didn't give him oxygen, and so he passed away. And there's been an inquiry, and it's resulted in the finding that if he had been treated seriously, if the hospital staff had been aware of his condition, then he'd still be alive today. So there are many recommendations that came out from the report. It's quite a comprehensive report, and I've just summed it down to the key recommendations. And the first one was that there was substandard care on general wards and in A&E when it comes to sickle cell. Now, this is not in those hospitals that specialize in sickle cell, but it's inside those hospitals, many of them around the country, outside the metropolis and large cities where there's an African population or sizable African population. They're just a complete unawareness when it comes to the issue of sickle cell. And so this could happen again. And I just want to say it could, it has happened again and again. You probably remember some of the early cases about a sister who was left and abandoned by London ambulance drivers who refused to believe that she was in crisis. And so another recommendation is that there needs to be some work to fix the failings in providing joined up sickle cell care. Because one of the things about sickle cell is that it doesn't just, it might be a blood disorder, but it affects all the organs. So it's not something you can just say, well, okay, take this pill or take this medication, everything's all right. What happens when you have a lack of oxygen getting around your body, then there's multiple organ damage that can occur. And this is the risk that everyone who has sickle cell has. And I should state this as well, because not a lot of people understand this, that when you have sickle cell, You know, do you remember the Hulk? There's a film, The Hulk, when someone said to Bruce Banner, I'm not making light of this, like, how do you transform? How do you transform so quickly? What's the situation there? And he goes, it's because I'm always angry. Well, there's a really excellent book by called Trouble for My Oscars, and he was an amazing clinician and advocate for sickle cell. And he argues, and you know, many people who are sickle cell have told me that they're actually always in crisis. It's just a different level of severity. So you know, clearly when it gets colder, when it's extreme weather or exertions or depletion of oxygen, the pain is there and it increases, and it's, you know, it's visible. You know, when I say visible, because it's not visible, that's part of the problem, but it's visible for them. It's tangible for them, but they manage to cope with it and they live with it. But what that means on the other side is that people who are living with sickle cell, their organs are constantly under attack. They're constantly being starved of the requisite blood supply or oxygen supply that they need. And so this is something that many people don't consider. So there has to be joined up a sickle cell care, because all the organs are at risk. There's also this low awareness of sickle cell amongst healthcare professionals, and they have inadequate training. So it's kind of like stop and search, where you know young cadets get a couple of hours on the use of violence and racism when they come out of Hendon. Well, when nurses and junior doctors all come out of training, they hear about sickle cell if they're lucky. But their experience with someone who has sickle cell, their ability to actually feel it and understand it on something outside a theoretical book or case is very, very low. And so this is, again, what leads to the situation, to what happened to our young son, Evan, who passed away in North Middlesex Hospital, just simply because they didn't believe him. And that's in London. There's also a need, however, and this is one of the things that came from the report, for some serious investment in sickle cell care. So we're hearing a lot about the lack of finance for social care, and the government's decided to implement a new tax, because taxes solve everything, right? A new tax to fix the social care crisis. Well, there's been a sickle cell care crisis for decades, under-resourcing when it comes to research, when it comes to looking at for new types of treatment, new types of cure. I mean, one of the things you'll find out is that if you have sickle cell, you know, you still have to pay for your prescriptions, even though this is a disability without a shadow of a doubt. You know, people who have sickle cell are disabled by society without any shadow of a doubt, but yet they still have to find means to pay for their prescriptions when these should actually be free of charge. So, I mean, there's so many different areas where I could talk about this lack of investment. You know, it's outrageous. And then the final comment I found inside the report, which I found really important to address, was that there's a negative attitude towards sickle cell patients. And this has a historic root. You know, back in the day, and I'm talking about a few decades ago, because when people with sickle cell are in crisis, severe crisis, one of the only treatments that can actually get rid of the pain is morphine, essentially. There was a lot of politics involved in this. We had a lot of clinicians who were unfamiliar with sickle cell, looking at patients with sickle cell as if they were drug addicts. And so you'd have some who wouldn't give medication, so they'd leave patients in pain, in crisis, at risk of strokes and the worst, as in what happened in the case of our son, Evan. And you had others who over-medicated, you know, kind of like leaning into this kind of like, you know, oh, this response to this racist accusation, which was there, that, okay, I don't want to be seen as racist. I don't even know if they're in pain. They might be pretending, they might be a drug addict, but I'm going to give them as much morphine as they want. And so they would over-medicate. And so what happens if you had sickle cell into hospital, these negative attitudes meant that you were at risk of having an overdose, you know, your renal organs slowing down and causing, like, you know, what they call an acute chest crisis, ACS, or not having enough crisis, and so not having enough oxygen, and so you getting a stroke and leading to death. So this negative attitude has a real impact So this is what this report was about. So I've labored the point quite a bit, but it's a very good point. It breaks all this into much more detail than I do and much more articulate than I do. But it's important to understand that this, even though this report just came out a couple of weeks ago, because this is a report that follows what's taken place in the UK over the last couple of weeks, a long-going issue. It's still ongoing, and it was exacerbated during the lockdown, where what you found is that people in the sickle cell community would rather actually stay at home in pain than risk going into hospital where there was COVID, where they had to have the risk of actually having a virus, a lethal virus that can kill them, plus all of these factors on top of them. So I thought I'd share that because this was a big story for one day. That was it. The media decided it only deserved one day. So this is another story which has legs. There was another case, I didn't share it, about a brother who left the UK, went to Ghana for his father's funeral, and then wasn't allowed back into the UK. I think it was like 30 months? It was quite a long time. And he became destitute, and he still hasn't received compensation. But I decided to lead with this story about Anthony Bryan because this is the one where, there was a BBC drama made of his case. It won a BAFTA. We're kind of familiar with his face, with his story, and yet he still hasn't received any kind of reparation for the Windrush scandal, which took place under this government's watch. They might have changed the cheerleader, and the head is the same party. What makes this incredibly galling is that, I watched Anthony speaking on Channel 4 News last week, and he explained how not only had his mother passed away, and because of the situation he had no money to bury her. He had to borrow and scrounge from friends to get the money to bury her. His son also passed away. So he's had this double whammy, and he's been cut off from funds. He himself has been discriminated against, and yet he still hasn't received compensation. And this is indicative of thousands and thousands of cases that have been found out in the aftermath of the Windrush scandal. I mentioned the case in Ghana because often when we talk about the Windrush scandal, that name is actually a misnomer because it refers to anyone who has roots in what the British perversely like to call the Commonwealth. If my father was here, he possibly could have been caught up in here, even though his roots were from Nigeria. But where we stand with the Windrush scandal is 15,000 there's estimated 15,000 claimants out there, but only 20% of them have actually applied. And this has been said to be because of the complexity of the forms, the fear that actually, kind of like contacting the government can actually lead to kind of repercussions. There's no guarantee that it's actually going to help them. But out of that 20% that's actually applied, it's incredibly to believe that only 5.8% of them have received any payment. This is just outrageous. And then on top of that, we know that at least 23 individuals have passed away without receiving any reparation. So the government's doing that thing again where it allows people to die so it saves the buck. It doesn't make any sense. There's also a campaign. It's been made very clearly and quite passionately, and over and over again, that there's a need to increase the amount that's being paid. This story about the brother who went to Ghana kind of outlined some of the criteria that was used to assess how much finance was paid. And I prefer to say reparation rather than compensation, because the compensation is only one aspect of resolving this issue. How do you resolve the issue of making someone destitute? How do you pay for that? How do you pay for someone's parent dying and you add into their trauma? For someone's child dying, you add into their trauma. So there is this issue about the amounts that are being paid are just paltry in the sense that they do not compensate. They're not punitive. There's no element to actually hold the government to account to make sure it doesn't do such a thing again. And I know, I mean, people will know, I engaged in a discussion, an online discussion with the architect, the brother who designed the scheme. And now he's coming out and saying that, the Home Office isn't really doing as good as it should do, even though he's still providing caveats for them. I'm quite disappointed with him. That is more than disappointment, but I'm just being too polite. I think, it doesn't matter that he's got Caribbean heritage and he's implicated, or his family's implicated, or might be a beneficiary of this scheme. I think he sold us out. I think that what he did was wrong in the way that he conceptualized that scheme, even though he may have started off with goodwill. He's complicit now with the government. And there's a real strong, compelling argument that administration of this compensation scheme, which should be a reparation scheme, because that would include a punitive element that the government can actually, and that punitive element could fund actually surgeries that can help find some of those 15,000 people who haven't stepped forward. It needs to be done independently from the Home Office, because it doesn't make sense that the Home Office is responsible for this crime. And it's now the Home Office that's also in charge of actually addressing it and compensating people for it without making any reparation. And, one of the things that's been called for is that there should be guaranteed legal assistance for all claimants. Now, one of the things I've been reading, which is really irritating me, is that many of these elders, and most of them are elders, came here as children. Most of these elders who are trying to make claims, they are so alone on this. They're so out of their depth in dealing with it. They don't want to make a mistake with this government and then end up being deported or locked in some detainment center. So they're going to lawyers who are doing on a no-win, no-fee basis. And what happens in those cases is that those lawyers are taking sums like 30% of any of the compensation that comes if they win. Now you might say, well, that's okay. I mean, at least they've won, they've got the money, they wouldn't have had the money and stuff like that. Well, no, it's not okay. It's not. This is an unjust situation that was not of any of their making. And it doesn't make sense that the legal profession should be profiteering from this. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be earning a living from this. Of course they should be, but there should be guaranteed legal assistance for all the claimants. And then independent lawyers who specialize in this kind of work can then support them through that and make a decent living without, the beneficiaries of these claims actually losing almost 30% of what they're supposed to receive. And that sum, as I've explained, I don't believe is high enough in the first place. So that's really all I want to say on this. In fact, I say that's all I want to say. If I remember correctly, I think I have another slide. I'll leave that at that. This story is, I struggled with putting this one in because this is actually linked to another story which I deliberately didn't include. It's about a Tory peer who's having like a squabble with someone whose yacht crashed into her yacht or some nonsense like this, and she called him a waste of a white man's skin or something like that. I think he's dual heritage, he's Asian as well, and so there's this whole thing about her being racist. Anyway, what's come out of this, like I said, I'm not going to go into much detail other than that. It's Tory racist. I mean, it's not rocket science. What's come out of this is that Desmond Swain, one of the government or Tory MPs, has said that people have this right to elect people who are, MPs who are racist or misogynist. He wouldn't want them to do so, so he claims, because he knows that he's probably one of them and he needs to kind of cover his back. But he says that they have a democratic right to do so. And this might sound like a bizarre statement. Why would someone actually come out and say this? What is the point of making such a ridiculous statement? This is only like a few days ago. Well, it's come about because there's a Commons Committee on Standards, which is supposed to regulate, moderate, the ethics of the MPs, and it's kind of like say how they should behave, whether they comply with the Nolan principles of conduct in public office, all these kind of things, and should they be promoting anti-discriminatory values, and it kind of like checks on them. And MPs like Desmond Swain, he believes that democracy is undermined if they're beholding to anyone, any kind of bureaucrat, any kind of administrator who can actually say, you know what you just said there was racist. So he's using, and it's unbelievable, but he's invoking the Bill of Rights about Parliament being sovereign. So whatever's said in Parliament can only be scrutinised by Parliament. And so any Commons committee, and this is why I started also with the sickle cell report, you need to understand that it might have all the flash logo or Parliament on it, but it doesn't have the weight of Parliament on it. So what Desmond Swain is saying is that he has a right, and other MPs have a right to say whatever they want to say in Parliament. And only the parliamentarians can actually say, here, naughty, naughty, don't say that, don't do that anymore. But they shouldn't be scrutinised, certainly not by someone on a committee, on a Commons committee. And this is a really important principle, just to kind of understand the nuances of how British parliamentary system works, how the governing policies work. So this idea that people have a right to elect racists and misogynists, but hopefully you wouldn't do so, it actually is encoded in the culture of Parliament. And that's a really important thing to remember, because they could bring into the culture this whole notion of being anti-discriminatory. They could say that we do not tolerate sexism inside Parliament. There are certain things that they could do, but they opt not to do, just so that they can actually have this supreme position where they're protected under law by anything that they say in Parliament, even if it is Afrophobic, racist, misogynist, homophobic, anything. So let me move on. Again, it's one law for everyone else and one law for them. Okay, just before I go on, you're listening to, you're watching Ligali Live. It's a 5th December Sunday. Just going through the news of the last 2 weeks. You can chat on the YouTube thingy bobby, or join us on Zoom. I'm afraid I don't have the code up at the moment, but it's the same on any other programs we've actually put out there. And I'm just going through everything. It's a Pan-African program, but we're focusing primarily on what's happening in the UK. And this story is actually a very positive one, as far as I'm concerned. I was going to put it at the end, because we do need some positive stories at the end. We haven't got many. But this one's about the BBFC, which is the British Board of Film Certification. And they're actually finally saying that they're going to have stricter guidelines on whether movies can actually use the N-word and how they regulate them. And this is really important. I know people think, oh God, it's like a nanny state kind of thing, but it's not. Today I saw something about a pressure group trying to get parliamentarians to block online porn for children. I was thinking, you're a bit too late with that one, love. I mean, that's out of the bag. It's the same thing with this in many ways, but it's good that they're actually making a stand. What they're saying now is that if you use the N-word in a film, then you're not going to get a TWAS certificate. It can't be anything lower than a TWAS certificate. And the reason why I think that's important is there's a difference between having language that is racial and having language that is racist in a film. And I know this firsthand, because I remember making a complaint to BBFC a couple of years ago when Oleander and I went to see a film called Uncut Gems with Adam Sandler. And I just wanted a break from the world. That's why I love films. It just gives you an opportunity just to escape, just even if it's just for an hour and a half, 2 hours, just to be somewhere else and not have to deal with the toxicity of this nonsense the world that we live in. And I can't believe that. It's a good film, but I can't believe within, it must have been around half an hour, there was N-word this and N-word that, and I couldn't switch off. And I remember looking at her and I was like, should we just head out, just leave it? And we just needed the break. And so it's one of those rare times I didn't walk out the cinema, and we stayed there. And like I said, it was a good film, but the N-word just tainted it, and it just peed me off, to be honest with you. Like, I did make a complaint, and I think the film was a 12 or something, and I was saying, well, it's adult themed, and we said it's adult themed in our description, blah, 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 blah. And so I wrote something through Ligali to them and stuff like that. But that was the end of that. It was a couple of years ago. And so it takes a long time for these changes to happen. But it is nice to see that now what they're saying is that they're going to follow the approach that I kind of wanted them to. I would have rather it only been 18 myself. But what they're going to do now is that if the language being used is racialized, it's racial language, they'll specify it's racial language. And if it's used in a racist context, they'll specify it's racist language. And so at least when you go to see a film and you read the certification and you can read the description that the BBFC issues with it, you can know going in whether you're going to be assaulted with a barrage of racism. And that's really important when you're of entertainment, a bit of drama, just to kind of like help you feel like the world isn't just so shit. Excuse the language, but that's what it is. And so they've written, it's highly unlikely that the N-word will be permitted in any content rated lower than a 12A and a 12, except in exceptional circumstances in which there is an overwhelming volume of mitigating factors. And that's actually a good conclusion to come to. Of course, there are going to be people who are saying, oh, blah, 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 nanny state, rah, 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 rah. Toyin, why don't you get over it, dear? You're just kind of being, like a Mary Whitehouse or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And it's not being a prude. I'm not saying that people want to use the N-word and hear the N-word, that they can't, that's up to them. But I'm saying that if I go to see something and I'm paying someone to go see something and it's got a certification on it, I expect that certification to have some kind of value system that I can rely on. And I don't expect my children to be exposed, because that's what 12A is. It's for children to expose to the N-word. I just don't expect that. If I went to take my children to see a Marvel film and it says a 12A, like a Spider-Man, I wouldn't expect them to be calling Miles like the N-word in the film or something like that. So anyway, that's I think, a good piece of news, but I thought I'd share that with you. Where else? Oh, I say I share that with you. Before I continue, I want to give a huge thanks out to Brother Colin. Once again, I did pick up some of these news stories, but he shared an amazing email with links to some of these stories, and that enabled me to go through these. I've been doing it if I seem ratty and I seem tired, it's because I've been doing that for the last 2 hours, and before then I was writing an article for a seminar I got to deliver on Wednesday. I've been working non-stop, like even during the weekends continuously, and it's just getting to me, headache, everything, high blood pressure, the works. So just having that, take that little bit off the work, much appreciated. Thank you. And all of you who send support, offer your support and love, whether it's your donations, whether it's just kind of like your likes, or just even just letting me know that you're there, it all adds up, it all helps. So thank you. So I'm going to try working on a different format for some of the slides as well, because I don't know how clearly you can see them. Oh, you might not notice we're in another location. I'll explain a bit more later. We're not in the place we were before, where we're supposed to be to the end of January. We're in another hotel. So that's the other thing. The whole week we've been moving from hotel to hotel trying to set up. So that's why the backdrop is, anyway, let me go on. I'll explain later. Maybe Yolanda will come and she'll tell you why I'm rattled. So there's this article that's come out that says that the BBC are under pressure to reinstate Michael Vaughan as the cricketer. As Mafiq says, the U-lot was made bigger than it was necessary, and I'll explain that. So Michael Vaughan was a BBC commentator. I'm not a great cricket fan, as you know. The days of kind of like watching it with my father way in my past. But he made this comment about there's too many of you lot in cricket or something like this. And so the BBC decided to get rid of him or suspend him. I haven't got all the details on that. But what's happened now is that Azim Rafiq, as we've spoken about him for the last couple of programs, who made this complaint about the ridiculous amount of racism that he faced while he was actually in the team, he is coming out now saying, actually, we've got to be a bit nuanced with this, and you lot, didn't have to be as big as that, didn't have to blow up as big as that. Maybe he shouldn't have lost his job and stuff like that. And that's quite magnanimous of him. The only problem is that I don't think he has the authority to do that. He can say what he wants, but it's not his call. I think we had to also remember, because he's also been recently caught out by using racist language, when he was younger. I think he used some anti-Semitic tropes. He might be feeling a little bit sensitive and compromised around this issue. And I get that. I don't have that same history as he does. So I don't have to be forgiven of this kind of stuff. If someone is actually making these racist comments, then I do think there should be an investigation to find the facts. And if the facts find out that actually it was a one-off mistake and he's apologized for it, and yeah, cool. I'm not that council culture kind of guy. But if we find out from an investigation that he's consistently making racist statements, then actually, yeah, he should go. it's not a bigger deal than necessary. And this is always the danger when we conflate issues of racism and Afrophobia and all these kind of things into debates about naughty words and so-called banter. This is structural. This is much deeper than one man's issues and failings and opinions. You know, this is actually something that impacts upon generations of people. So, you know, it's an interesting article, and it's magnanimous. You know, it's, you know, very kind of noble of Azim Rafiq to say this, and you know, especially after what he's been through. But I think we have to be careful with green lighting this, letting people off the hook, like, you know, just because we feel, you know what I mean, we don't want them to dig into me a bit more. You know, I don't run with that. And just to double down on why I don't run with that is because we've seen the opposite side when someone does take it seriously. So I don't know anything about Yorkshire's chair, Kamilesh Patel of Bedford. All I do know is that director of the cricket team, Yorkshire, stepped down, he stepped up, and he just said, right, okay, we need to make some serious changes because the way that you handled the complaint that was made was just outrageous. And so he just let go 60 members of staff. And he said, like, look, this is necessary. We have to do this in order to move forward from the past. I mean, we need to have a culture that is, you know, inclusive and progressive. And I can't do that with the old guard in there. And so, like I said, I know nothing about Kamilesh Patel. I don't know, you know, if he's a good person, a bad person. All I know is that this is the right approach. And then again, investigate those 16 that went. And if they're part of the cultural, toxic culture that let racism fester inside the Yorkshire Cricket Club, then they were right to get rid of them. They're right to go. And so I don't, you know, this is the reason why it's really important to understand that it's not an issue of one person. Yes, he may have been a recipient. I'm talking about Rafiq. He might be the recipient of the abuse in that particular instance. But as we spoke about in the last couple of weeks, other people have stepped forward who have also suffered, and they've felt empowered by his bravery in actually speaking out. And so that's why I'm going to leave this on cricket because it's not my area of expertise, but dealing with Afrophobia and racism and all these kind of structural problems, that is my area of expertise. And so, yeah, I'll move on. So that's cricket, that's sport. I talked about my area of expertise, and my expertise is education. It's institutions like universities, and councils, and all these other larger bodies. And one of the reasons why, you know, if I seem very passionate about talking about those kind of things, because this is a live issue. So this story is about Professor Christopher Jackson, who's a geologist at the University of Manchester, and he's been receiving letters, or in particular one letter, but he's been receiving these kind of like little digs and microaggressions. So this particular letter has come out telling him, why don't you go back to the Caribbean, you know, go live there. Blacks like you are a total disgrace, all that kind of nonsense. And he went to the police, and the police said, well, we can't really identify the source of the person. We're not really sure that this is something that we can really investigate. So we're not going to investigate it. And this actually matters. His university apparently is actually making the right noises. They're going to support him. They're going to look into it because I think it's clearly one of his students. You know, someone's upset with something he said in a lecture, or upset with his grade, or just upset with the fact that he's an African, or feels gripes, whatever it is. It's racist. They're making these statements, but this is real. You know, this isn't something that happened 100 years ago, 10 years ago, 5. That's happened, you know, last month or so. And so this is how, if we let those microaggressions slide, then they turn into big problems. They turn into, you know, the structure itself starts to perpetuate and duplicate and magnify the level of these microaggressions. And so the fact that the police won't investigate is you know, very disappointing. I haven't had a chance to go through all the details on that and why they want, you know, this an article, you can read it on the Evening News Manchester paper. They've got a copy of the letter, and you can have a quick read through it. I don't think they're using the N-word and stuff like that. It's just got this nasty Afrophobic undercurrent underneath it. And I think it's actually worth that somebody should find out, you know, who did it and why you're sending this and what's going on. And like, you know, do you really belong in a university that's got inclusive or progressive values if actually you have a problem with your lecturer because of the color of their skin and because they're African? So That's it. There was one interesting quote that I pointed out from the article, which Professor Jackson said. He said that if you read the letter out, if you shouted it at somebody outside a pub, then that would be threatening. And that's a really good point, because when, you know, I might just say, why don't you go back and live in the Caribbean? And you might be thinking, well, is that really threatening? Is that something the police should investigate? But that's because it's been written for. You don't think about what it feels like if someone was actually to say it. It's got a different tone. If someone says, blacks like you are a total disgrace, yeah, then you can pick up the racist undercurrent of that really, really clearly. It's specifically Afrophobic. And that's really important. So just because it's written down, it's in polite English, if you want, for a better phrase, doesn't mean that it's not something that should be investigated and taken seriously. Talking about taking things seriously, I think we've got to commend the University of Aberdeen, because not only did it recently return some of the Benin bronze to Nigeria, but it's actually now going to send back some of the skulls, some of the, it sounds really bizarre that they even have them, but the body parts that was stolen from indigenous communities around the world, once they found out who they belong to, or which communities they go to, which Amerindian communities they belong to, and send them back. Now, if you can read the Daily Mail headline, Scottish University launches bid to repatriate collection of human skulls looted from the graves of Amerindians or Native Americans, African slaves, and other communities by cancelled 19th century naturalist John James Borden. The word cancelled in quote, this is a way to diminish the fact that what the University of Aberdeen is doing is actually the right thing. Actually, they're trying to identify, because this was stolen in 1859, and so they're trying to identify which community should they go back to. So there is the skulls of African people in that collection, and this James or John James Abudon, I don't know of him. So they say council. I mean, maybe other people are familiar with his history. I'm not, but apparently he seems to have taken these skulls and they used the phrase in the article, gifted them to the university. I really do not like this language. But again, this is what's taking place when people think that topics, discussions about Afrophobia, about decolonization are something in the past, that they've been overblown. Well, this is a reminder of actually how live and how real it is. How would you like to know that, you buried your loved one and then some academic dug up your grave, took the parts of your loved one and placed it in some university vault, like, 50 years, 100 years in the future? I think that knowing that now, you'd be quite angered by it. And if you are one of the descendants or anti-descendants of that person, you'd still be angered by it. So I just wanted to share that story and say, well done, University of Aberdeen, for taking these matters seriously and at a structural level. Oh God, I've got a headache. Sorry. Okay, this is not a nice story. It's a nice story, but it's not a nice story. So there's this, okay. Earlier this year, Aliso Dukwe took his life. He's a 20-year-old, football fan. He used to play. I don't know all the details of why he committed suicide, but he did. I remember someone told me that we've got to get rid of that phrase, committed suicide, because it make it sound like a crime. But he did. He took his own life. And his friends were quite upset and hurt by it. And so this was a story that was shared with me. I think it's quite nice. And it's about an entrepreneur called Arthur Leventhorpe from Battersea, who's actually raised, I think it's around £5,000, and he's donated it to Black Minds Matter charity as a way to raise awareness for the mental health of people of African heritage. And that's really it. That's the story. It's a good story. It's a tragic story. It's just a reminder that we don't talk about the stresses of mental health. We don't talk about what happens when people feel they've got nothing to live for, or they're stressed so much that they take their own lives. But it's a real problem. It's a real issue. And thank you, Leventhorpe, for doing this. I'm sure your friend will be smiling at you for your contributions. Go to the next slide. So this one is pretty much where we're at. Now, our landlord, or this is one of them when you don't own property, and I don't own property. In fact, it's the only first time in my life since running my own record labels that I could feasibly have bought property. If I'd known, I would have done so. But when you are renting property and you have, like a landlord, it could be a council or housing association. I think there's been a case on BBC London of a council. This one's about a housing association. Sometimes what happens is they get outrageous. They get in the rent, like clockwork. They're quite happy. They don't take care of the conditions of the property. Now, where I'm living, our home, the property conditions are nothing like this, which is cockroach ridden and stuff like that. Even though we do have a massive hole in our roof and ceiling, which is being repaired right now. But in this particular story, a point has been made that the CEO of the housing association, in this case, is the housing association is called Clarion Housing Group, is earning £411,000 a year. It's almost £500,000, and they just got a £51,000 bonus, annual bonus. And yet their tenants are living in these. This is just one image. There were loads of squalor. It was just outrageous. And Claire Miller, who is the CEO, who's in charge, who's actually now the third highest paid CEO in the country, apparently, according to this article on My London. And I normally wouldn't cover this story, but I'm a little bit probably personally invested. Because earlier this week, I was just about to deliver my lecture, and I got a text message telling us that we were homeless. That we had to get out of our temporary accommodation, which we had expected to be living in until the ending of January, when we'd return home. And we had like less than 7 hours. They took the keys, they were digital keys. They removed them from our phones, so we had less than 7 hours to get out. And so we had to just pack suitcases. I had to teach, and we had to all run home. My son was left outside in the cold. They came into the apartment while my daughter was getting changed. She was, they just walked into the bedroom and says checkout time. We had no idea this was going to happen, and we were made homeless. And we had no idea what we were going to do. We had our suitcases and our bags. We had to leave most of our stuff in the apartment. And in the end, we stayed in Premier Inn overnight, and then that expired, and we're like, what are we going to do tomorrow? What are we going to do tomorrow? And then eventually we moved here, which is admittedly a nicer place, the Hoxton, until tomorrow when we're checking out. And hopefully we're moving into another place on Monday. And I feel irritated because I know we were homeless, but I don't like saying the word we're homeless, because there are people who are homeless. And I mean homeless. I see them on the streets when I go to work, and I see the cardboard boxes and blankets that they're living in. But I can't tell you how, when you have all your possessions in a building you can't access, and you're just walking around with your suitcase, and it's in the back of the car, and your bike, and you don't know what you're going to do, you don't know where you're going to sleep, you don't know what you're going to eat, and whatever, it destabilizes you. So this is what I seem ratty. It's because that's what happens, and this is what happens, when we live in a capitalist environment. So you can see that the CEOs are earning so much money, but the tenants are just living in an awful condition. I've seen a question, Twain, that makes me want to ask: how do you take care of your mental health? Oh, thank you for asking. That's a really good question. Normally, I take care of my mental health by making music, by just watching sci-fi and having fun, but unfortunately, I haven't been doing that. I mean, I can tell you now. I mean, I took my blood pressure readings just a couple of hours ago. 140 over 105, I think it was, which is pretty bad. And so I'm drinking peppermint tea, which helped calms me down. I've been listening to music. I've got my sister got me this lovely gift, a Sonos speaker. It was, and it really, I can't explain how much it helps me just to listen to music, and I suppose I avoid arguments. I avoid conflict where I can. I mean, unfortunately, because of the work I do, I deal with conflict. I mean, last week there was a strike, which was interesting, that I was part of, but I mean, I deal with conflict. But I suppose I manage my mental health, with just, music. I've been watching Deep Space Nine. I'm on the last season. I've been watching Star Wars Clone Wars. That's been fun. I'm thinking about avoiding the news, because the news, it's very difficult. It's my work. So I need to know what's going on in the world. I need to report back to our community. I have to synthesize it. I have to think it through. I have to research it. So you get a lot of negative news. And also I'm helping people through emails. So I suppose, I'm not meditating like I used to. So I suppose I need to get back into that. But yeah, I think those are the ways I help. I mean, it's, I don't take alcohol, I don't take drugs. So, everything's just is head on. But strangely enough, doing this work is meditative for me. It actually helps. The fact that I'm helping other people actually helps me. So thinking these things through, talking them through, helping other people. And I help a lot. I don't talk about all the work that I do, but I am in a blessed position that I get a lot of emails and communications. And even though I can't answer everything, I mean, my emails have gone through the roof because I haven't had a home. So they're just building up every single day. But I do answer a few emails, and then every time I'm able to help someone and they can go off and resolve their issue, it helps. It calms me down. It makes me feel, right, that's what you're here to be doing. That's what the ancestors put you in place to do. Yeah, so hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, let me move on to the next slide. So racism, yeah. This was a story that was just a couple of weeks old. A former police officer, he said he was racially abused by institutionally racist Leicestershire police. And the point he's making here is really that the investigation that's looking into the Met Police, because of Sarah Everard's murder, needs to also look into other police forces around the UK. He's a dog handler. He was raised in South London, always wanted to be a police officer. And then they started using these slurs, like putting banana by his locker and calling him Blackie Chan and all these kind of things. So he's in a tribunal case right now, so the police are not reporting on it. But I think the important message that he's trying to say is that the racism, the Afrophobia that he's experienced isn't just limited to the Metropolitan Police. It's actually a UK-wide phenomenon, and it has to be seen as UK-wide phenomenon. I suspect that because the Sarah Everard case, there'll be more focus on misogyny and sexism, which they should be, but it will push issues of Afrophobia to the side. And this is the problem with faddism, where it doesn't stay focused and see the job through to the end. It kind of like, what's that song? Do Something That You Can't Take Back. Malia's song. It's a really cool song. They start the motion, they make all the squealing noises, and then they move on to the next fad before they actually address the problem. I didn't even think I wanted to talk about this one. The reason why I say Afrophobia, some people say, why do you keep saying Afrophobia? It's not in the dictionary. It's only a few articles, blah, 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 blah. Well, it's not just me saying Afrophobia. The European Union said Afrophobia. Loads of African people said beforehand. I will write an article on this. It's one of the benefits of being an academic, but the problem not having the time to just stop and my mental health, I love writing, and I can't read and I can't write right now because I'm always marking or doing some administrative stuff. But when I do get a chance to sit down and write, I want to write about Afrophobia and then lock it into the national discourse somehow, and I'll force it through. Because it's specific. Afrophobia is different from racism, and I'll explain why. In this particular story, which again, this is 2 days old, right? This is 4 days old. This is not even that long ago. One of the Metropolitan Police officers, a sergeant, mocked the African Grenfell residents for being too stupid, or he used the word too thick to escape the tower block when it was burning. And I say this is Afrophobia because people sometimes think, well, why do you keep saying Afrophobia? Because Afrophobia is specifically about people of African heritage, and accusations and the disgusting comments that this sergeant has been overheard saying, which he's denying, by the way, saying was specific about people of African heritage. And so what's been said that he claims, and this is, again, he's denying this, he's facing a disciplinary hearing for misconduct. I hope that they follow through on this. He's saying that the comments made by Jacob Rees-Mogg, the MP, I don't know if you remember earlier in the year, where he said that the people in Grenfell were too stupid, that's why they died, because, if anyone else was in Grenfell, they would have just left with the fire and they wouldn't have died. So, and then he came back and made this half-mouthed apology. Well, he's saying that comment was correct. And he says, if it had been the Asians, they would have left. If it had been the whites, he's referring to European people, they would have left. But he's saying that African people were just too thick, were too stupid, and that's why they died. He's also saying that there's so few African football managers because we're just lazy. We're thick and lazy. I don't even remember that quote used by Ron Atkinson against the French striker. And this narrative about African people being lazy when it was our labor during enslavement, the fact that, in fact, I don't want to get triggered. So that's what he says. But the final thing that he said, and he made this in a pub when he had alcohol down him, I suspect. So this is where he was overheard by other officers. I think it's an officer who reported it. I'm not sure. You can only hope it was an officer. But he said comments like, Africans, we're better off under colonial rule. Because ever since colonial rule ended under Mugabe, things have been much, much worse and full of famine and poverty now. Essentially, look at it now. It is and he says the same thing that Trump says. And what I think is really interesting about this police officer, this sergeant, not a new recruit, it's a 30-year-old man, custody sergeant in the map, is that each of these accusations are duplications of comments made by his peers, not his peers, that's the wrong term, his superiors, those that he would see as his superior. So if you think about Jacob Rees-Mogg comment about the people who died in Grenfell were too thick, he might have made it African-centered. He may have, kind of like introduced the Afrophobic element to it, because Jacob Rees-Mogg was just talking on a class level. He was just saying, oh, they're just stupid, that's why they died. He's the one who said, if it was Asians, if it was Europeans. But that's one. So that's his parliamentary superior. Then the comment about football managers. Ron Atkinson was a manager. He was the one who made that statement, and he's regurgitating this. And then this comment about Africa being a shithole, which is what he said, that was the actual word he said, excuse the language, that came from the orange one, the Trump clown. And so again, what we're seeing is that this corruption is filtering from the top all the way down. And when it filters down, it's filtering down into people in positions of authority, people who can commit violent acts, who can take the liberty of innocent people and actually get away with it, essentially, because they are part of that culture, they're part of that hegemonic structure, which oppresses and hurts, and often, I say often, socially murders people. So this is why it's important to explain the story and keep an eye on it. This is a current case. I mean, like I said, this story is only 4 days old. It's a disciplinary hearing, so I don't know how we'll get all the details out. These things are normally held behind closed doors, but hopefully a report will be made out, because the police seem to be making all squealing noises about wanting to be transparent because they know that there's lack of public confidence in them, blah, 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 blah. Won't even investigate Boris Alexander Pitford Johnson's Christmas party, but hey. All right, next slide. So on the matter of Grenfell, I don't know if you know, there's this big spat about Lewis Hamilton. Essentially what's happened is that the F1 team that he's a part of has actually done a sponsorship deal, or they've taken money from Kingspan, and Kingspan are one of the organizations that made some of the flammable cladding that was used on Grenfell. And so the family and the Grenfell United are rightly saying that actually you shouldn't be promoting these people on your car when you're driving around. This is out of order. And all due respect, and thankfully, I think the families in the Grenfell United are supportive of this, is that this wasn't a decision that Lewis Hamilton kind of like made. He didn't bring them to the F1. And the F1 chief, Tutu, I think his name is, I'm not sure. I read a letter that he wrote, and he asked the right questions even beforehand, and he's still investigating it. And there's a possibility that they can take the logo off Lewis Hamilton's car, and so it won't be promoted. Some people think, why does this matter? This is just money. This is capitalism. This is commercialism, and this is what happens. Well, Kingspan, even though Kingspan will argue that weren't responsible for putting the cladding on Grenfell. What they were responsible for, from what I can hear or what I can see, is that they were doing some tests of the material, and they did a test of material, and one of their products kind of like, it was really flammable. And so they issued another formulation that wasn't as flammable, but they hid the original test. I can't remember how it works. You know what? Maybe I should just shut up because I am tired. My head's gone. But if I remember correctly, the test that showed it was flammable, they didn't use that test. So they didn't put that test out there. So people were using a newer test of the new formulation that wasn't flammable, but they were still buying the old product that was flammable. I hope that makes sense, and I'll probably have to read it through again. But Kingspan, until an inquiry comes through, do not have clean hands on this matter. And so this is not the time to start endorsing them. And I think Lewis Hamilton has made the right sounds. I don't know him, but so far he's been quite consistent and been on the right side of these social justice issues. So I'm more than willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on this one. And then we have internal issues that need to be dealt with. I'll say internal issues. Well, Donald Rawl was 18-year-old murdered by these two cousins. Don't know why. They used a Rambo knife on him. He died from a stab wound. 22 years of age, I think 27. I don't know. What can you say? And there's more. 14-year-old Yusuf Mustafa shot dead Keon Lincoln, who was 15. He's been jailed for life. He was accompanied by two 18-year-olds, and it's the words of the mother that just, she says, "I'm in a nightmare that I cannot wake up from. My heart is broken beyond repair. A piece of my soul has been taken from me. I see my baby boy's face as he lay slumped on the ground, struggling to breathe. I hear the words, his heart has stopped. I miss my boy so much it physically hurts." I can't imagine that, the pain of knowing that your baby, your 15-year-old baby, has been shot with a revolver by another 14-year-old child, and chased. I think they chased him with a scooter and a car. These 18-year-olds. Again, the police said they don't know what the cause was. I don't know, but it's senseless. And I say this is internal issues that we're dealing with. I don't even want to speculate on what's causing this because I just don't have enough information. I just know it's a tragedy, and it gets worse. This one, I'll read there's a question that's coming. This one resonates with me because I suppose I have affinity with the father. I sense this is the father could have been me. He acts in the way that I act. So I don't know if you know this story. This took place early this year. So there was a young boy. He was 15-year-old. He was with his friend. He got on a bus. There was this other guy, Marcus Griffith. He started making noises and started being aggressive towards the children. They weren't saying anything to him. They weren't doing anything. They were just children, right? And so the boys got off the bus quickly, calls his dad, and said, Dad, this guy's threatening us. He's really dangerous. So the father, Michael Fadiyomi, comes running out. He comes to see what's going on, sees his son is okay, sees the guy. He says something to the guy, turns his back, starts to walk to his son to go home. And then the guy stabs him in the neck, slices an artery. And he passes away. And that's it. There's no reason. Griffith gives what's it called? A no comment. A no comment interview. We don't know why he died. We don't know why he did it. There's no mental health statement being given. That's it. So that's another case that's happening. Oh my God. And then most of you have probably heard the story of Arthur Binjo Hughes. He was the boy, the child who was murdered by his mother and her boyfriend. And it's been over the news every single day. And they poisoned him with salt. They blamed him for his injuries. The boy couldn't even stand in the video. You know, and so the media is doing their thing, bringing up Victoria Clumbe. I speak to Oleander, she can't even listen and watch the story because it reminds her and it invokes it all in and stuff like that. But what we also forget, and this is going through court right now, is the murder of Kimani Watson Darby in West Bromwich in July 2018. And the case is actually, you know, it's been heard in the courts now. And the mother, Alicia Watson, and her partner, they both deny murdering the beautiful son. And when the ambulance people came up, they said that he looked like he'd been hit in a car crash. Basically, he'd been beaten for weeks. It's just the way they punished him. He was 3 years old. Kimani was 3 years old. So the case, I think, is still ongoing. We haven't heard what's happening. So we probably won't hear much about this story, but you know, we need to be aware of this because it's happening within our community as well. We're going to hear a lot more about Arthur Binjo Hughes and the disgusting, I can't even call them human beings, that murdered him. But again, we need to understand that this is real, that there are humans out there who abuse and murder children, children that they've given birth to. You know, in both cases, there was step children. I mean, in Arthur's case, she had 2 other children, and the other children she looked after fine. You know, you know, but this child wasn't hers, and I don't know. I don't know what to say. Let me read this message. I'm glad you mentioned that story about Lewis Hamilton, but I like the way he's vocal about his values. Yes, I feel the same way, because one of the things we've been lacking is people with media platforms actually speaking up. In fact, it's more than just him saying things. I like the fact he put his money where his mouth is. And I hear that he's been, you know, making donations to organizations and setting up trust funds and different things to help community groups. And that's why, you know, so giving him grace in this situation is important. I agree. That's the reason. That's why I do it, because it's all very well. While Black Lives Matter was kind of like everywhere, we saw a lot of people from our community speak up about these issues for 5 minutes, and now they've all gone back into the woodwork, and it's leaving people who you know, who have everything to lose, because these people are multimillionaires. You know, they can take this. But when that spotlight vanishes, people who are still talking about this, who don't have that wealth to inoculate them from the backlash, they lose their homes, they lose their jobs, they lose their sanity, they lose their health. So it's good that he's vocal, and it's good that he's doing this kind of work, and that's why he does deserve the benefit of the doubt. And we'll see how that story plays out. But we also know people who deal with these particular issues in our community, about the violence against children, and just because that's all I've talked about for the last, I don't know, 15 minutes. All these stories have just been the deaths of children by children and by their parents. You know, and how do you make sense of this? So a couple of weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago, I spoke about missing children that take place in the UK that we don't know about, that happens every single week. And so thank you, Brother Colin, for sharing some of these details. There's an organisation called Missing People. You can call or text them on the number above. That's 116 000. It's a free and confidential line. If you see any of these children, you know, they will contact the authorities on your behalf. They don't need your details. If you see them, if you have any idea where they are, please contact them. They can do that work for you, so you don't have to get involved if you don't want to. We don't know what's happened. So I know I've given those horrible stories beforehand. That doesn't mean that these cases, children are in danger. It could be, there could be a problem that they're feeling at home or at school or anything. But Messiah Tapper, he's 12 years of age when he disappeared. He's missing from Handsworth. Franklin, he's 14 years of age at his time of disappearance. He's missing from Harrow in London. And then next two are Chanel Nelson. She's 14 years of age. She's missing from Brent in London. And Ellie Mae Lionel, she is 17 years of age, missing from Chingford. So if you see any of these, I'll show the other slide again, any of these children, please feel free to call the number 116 000. It's missing people. Like I said, the line's free. You can call them, you can text them. You don't have to give them your details. They won't pass your details on to the authority. So if you know them and you just don't want to get involved, but you're worried about their well-being, please, do what you can, and we'll try and keep this up somehow. Well, I don't know. I'll think something. But yeah. So I don't normally put in anything about the COVID, but it's a question that I'm often asked, sort of like while I'm here, when I'm offline, when I'm on the streets. So many members of our community are always asking me questions about COVID and what's going on. So I thought for the first time what I'd do is, because I'm not doing the COVID videos anymore, not because I don't want to, not because it's not a risk to our community, but I just literally don't have capacity. I thought I'd just really just break down quickly what I think. And remember, I'm not an epidemiologist, I'm just toying. What I think about the Omicron variant that's happening. And I've taken some quotes out and summarized them. So there's this, if you're not aware, there's this new variant that has been detected in South Africa. It doesn't come from South Africa, it's been detected in South Africa because they have the equipment to detect the variants, and it's been spreading quite peripherally in the region. And so you're probably aware that the UK government, amongst other governments, have locked down flights to Southern African nations, and have also, I think yesterday they included Nigeria in that list, so people can't come to the UK if they're from those areas. I get it, I'm not going to go into the politics of that, but what most of you I suspect want to know is, what does this mean to us right now? What does it mean to those of us who have taken the vaccine? What does it mean who haven't taken the vaccines? So I've taken out these 3 quotes from this article that's on the Observer. So it's a good article, it's a good summary you can go and get from their website. And these 3 are the most important things I think that you need to know. It says that the Omicron variant has now been detected in 38 countries, although no deaths have been reported in any of these nations. And that's come from the World Health Organization. And so that's important because what we've seen, what seems to be happening is that this variant is much more transmissible. It means it's much more infectious. So if someone gets it, it's much easier for it to pass on to the next person. The good news so far is that no deaths have come from it. So that would seem, even though it's spreading fast, or it can spread fast, it's like it's not leading to serious illness. Now that's complicated. Why is it not leading to serious illness? It's because most of the cases we know are in South Africa or Zania, and South Africa has a very young population, and young people have strong immunity to coronavirus. So it's a distorted picture for us to use that and map that onto a population like those of us in the UK, to assume that if this was to spread at the same rate it was spreading in South Africa, that it would have the same results here. I think there's like 140 something cases in the UK. When it's 140,000 cases, then we'll have a better picture of whether it's leading to hospitalizations. The other quote I'll put here is that evidence indicates that Omicron has an advantage over other variants in bypassing the immune system. Again, this is from UCI. This is an important piece of information. It means that even if you have been vaccinated or you caught coronavirus, developed natural immunity towards it, this variant is sufficiently mutated that actually the vaccine can't quite catch it, can't quite stop it. And people who've already got natural immunity to it are likely to catch it. So you could be double vaccinated. I don't like using that term jab. I don't know where that how that's become, so you can be double vaccinated and you can still get this. What it's really irritating me that politics are not saying is like, you could actually right now even be what's that, boosted. You could have had a double vaccination and had a booster, and you could still catch this. When that question is what do we know about this new COVID variant? The answer is we don't know. And that's the honest answer. There's not enough data on this variant to say whether it's dangerous or not. So the final quote here is, if the variant is able to evade the immune system response of young people, then the built-up immunity in the elderly due to high levels of vaccination combined with natural infection will be less meaningful. And this is from a professor at Edinburgh University who is an epidemiologist or specialist in this field. And what this sentence means is that because young people have a naturally strong immune system when it comes to coping with coronavirus, and the fact is that they have this amazing immune system, and yet they can still catch this thing. And then that there are people who have been double vaccinated and they can catch this thing. It means that there's a good clue that the vaccine is not going to be effective against this. And so it doesn't mean that it's going to lead to hospitalizations and it's going to lead to more deaths. That's not an automatic assumption to make, but it is a possibility. It does mean there's a need to be careful. There's a need not to make assumptions that if you catch this thing and you've had your double vaccination and you just had your booster, you're going to be all right. The signs are on these low figures that so far it looks like, yeah, you probably will, you may be, but no one, absolutely no one can say that with any certainty. And so the best thing to do, and I'll try and give you a case study. So what we did, well, overall case study, the best thing to do is to wait for, I mean, they're saying 2 weeks. I don't think that's enough time for all the data to come in. They're going to rush some kind of vaccine profile. I would say wait for a month or two. That if this is spreading at the rate that it seems to be spreading, then after a month or two, they're timing it to 3 weeks because they're looking at Christmas, because Christmas is a commercial holiday. This is a financial decision they're making. It's got nothing to do with health. But after like a month or two, there's probably going to be so many infections because it's cold, so people are going to be more inside. They're going to be partying inside. They're not going to be want to wear masks and stuff like this. There'll be such a high spread of people with this variant that we'll be able to see from the data which people are more likely to be seriously ill and hospitalized from it, and which ones are not. And if you think about the 3 different profiles, so there's those who are unvaccinated. Well, for them, it's the same as everyone else. It's going to be a bit worse because they don't have any antibodies from catching the other variant, the initial variants, the Delta variants and all those other variants, or having the vaccine. Because if you had that, you'd have the antibodies, the T blood cells, which fight against these kind of viruses. So my advice to you, if you're unvaccinated, is the same as ever. Please wear a mask. Please practice social distancing. Please be careful. This one is said to be around 6 times more transmissible. I don't know how accurate that is, but that's what people are saying. That's what seems to be the case, which means if you remember the Delta one, I can't remember, was like 3 or 4 times more transmissible than the original coronavirus. Well, this one is 6 more times more transmissible than the Delta variant. So it means that once this one has found us an area, it will spread fast. That's that. So be careful. For people who are double vaccinated, it's the same thing. Be mindful. You will have antibodies in your system because the way that the vaccinations work, even one vaccination would give you like 70% protection. The double vaccination takes it up to 90% protection. Over time, it's going back down. So they're giving you a booster to take you back up to the 90s and the late 80s and stuff like that. But the truth of the matter, once you've got over 70% protection of antibodies, you can cope with the original COVID. You can cope with the original coronavirus. The problem is that no one knows the situation with this one. No one knows, how it's going to respond. Can it evade all of the antibodies? That's the question. It's unlikely, but we don't know. And, I'm a nerd. I'm not going to say things I don't believe are not true. I don't do wrong and strong. We don't know. And so the only way to know is to see what happens. What's happening in South Africa, there's no deaths, which is good. Infections going through the roof, not many hospitalizations throughout that. But that's a different profile than the UK. And then there's the booster question. This is the strange one. And I know this is the thing I should really keep my mouth shut on. I mean, I keep getting pings and text messages about taking the booster, and I've not taken it. And I know that's just being irresponsible in many ways, because, you know, the vaccines, I have taken 2 vaccines, and they wane over time. So the double vaccine would have got me to 90, then it would have gone down to 80, and so it'll be waning over time. So I have no idea what the vaccination counters might be in my body. And so there's nothing really there's no logical reason for me not to take the booster, because that would boost me back up into the 80s and 90s, which would mean that if I get the original Delta variant, which is around, let's not pretend it's not around, then I'll be protected against it. But I know, you know what, I don't know. If you're in a profile like you're over 60, maybe over 50, because you could have respiratory problems over 50, it does make sense to take the booster. I haven't, so I'm being a hypocrite. I'm probably going to wait for a couple of months, because I am one of those people that don't want to take a vaccination every year and every 5 minutes. It's not me. So if I'm going to take another dose, and I will, I would rather that dose was reconfigured to address this particular variant. And then I'll be more likely to take another one. I'm not going to just inject things into my body continuously, but then I can't put my family at risk. There's all kinds of questions there. So some people just say taking the booster is a no-brainer, but when the government ministers are coming out and the health officials are saying, take the booster, it'll protect you against this, they're just lying. We don't know. So the booster, the only thing the booster is doing, it's like playing cards and increasing the odds. It's like a gamble again. It's like, it's not going to hurt you. That's one thing I'm pretty sure about. But it's even then, you know, I don't want to, you know what, it's up to you. That's the situation. I can't work it out. I'm not going to tell anyone not to take a booster at all. I mean, you know, that's the situation. If you're double vax, you might as well just take the booster as well and stuff like that. But if you're hesitant as well, I kind of get that. We're not going to have data on this thing for another month or 2. And then with that, the good thing is that they can tweak the profile of the vaccines to match this particular variant, and that will give you protection. So let's wait and see. Well, that's the light skin protection. Let's wait and see what happens. Oh, the Queen is back. So let me go on to the next slide. I think this is probably, I don't know if I've gone over time. Okay, so it's been quite a heavy program this week. So let me give you a couple of good stories. I say good stories, they're still twinged with a bittersweet anger. So Charles Greenlee, Walter Irving, Samuel Shepherd, and Ernest Thomas have been exonerated after 72 years. They were dubbed back in the day as the Grosvenor Four. And this was after Norma Paget, who was a 17-year-old American teenager, accused her of dragging her off, raping her at gunpoint. We now know that the evidence was manufactured. That, you know, they implied that there was semen on the trousers of one of the boys. There was no, they did tests now. There was no semen on it, and that the convictions were unsafe. I say bittersweet because even though they've been exonerated posthumously, they've passed away now. They're no longer with us. We know that Ernest Thomas was murdered before, you know, before even the trial even happened, by a mob of Europeans who shot him apparently 400 times. And we know that Samuel Shepherd was shot and murdered by the police, a local sheriff named Willis McCall, en route to the trial, to the court in 1951. And so it's taken 72 years to get, I can't call it justice for them to be exonerated, but there is no justice because they're all dead. They're all ancestors. And the wicked system that enables this kind of stuff to happen is still in place, still doing the same stuff. But yeah, I could talk about the Malcolm X, and in fact, I won't even go into that one. Good news. So we spoke about this in the last broadcast. Barbados is now formally a republic, and Sandra Mason is its first president. There's a quote from the poet laureate Esther Phillips, who says, "What I did not know about was that there was such a thing as West Indian history. I think she means African Caribbean history, and that there was such a thing as African history. The erasure was so complete. And she was talking after this this transformation to republic about what it meant. It's a lovely interview. You can read this one on the website called The World, and how reparations are fueling the spirit of republicanism in Barbados. Some of you asked me at the last program how many nations have become republics. So I think since I've put 4 here: 1992 Mauritius, 1970 Guyana made the same decision, 1976 Trinidad and Tobago, and 1978 Dominica. So there is trajectory. I think there's still another, is it 16 to go? I mean, yeah, you can remember places like Canada, she's still not the monarch. But I must come, it's an apt song to hear. So yeah, I'll leave that at that. I think I'm just going to turn the phone off. Oh, okay, so there's a question coming. What happens to the men who accuse, the people who accuse these men? They seem to just say sorry and disappear. Yeah, that's it. What happened to the woman who made the false allegation in the first place? This is why I can't use the word justice in those cases. It's a bittersweet announcement, but yeah, what happened to the police officer? This is why we need to have researchers. This is why we need to have, I can't say legality because there's not enough of us, but we need to have people who go back and find out what happened to that police officer. You know, the one who shot and murdered Samuel Shepherd. What happened to those people who put the 400 bullets? I mean, what happened to them? You know, I am of the ilk that we go after every single one of them, that we do whatever investigations we can do now. If we can have the technology to exonerate, our children now, 70 years afterwards, then I am of the ilk that we have the technology to prosecute, to locate and prosecute. They're going to be dead. You know what I mean? Unless some of them were children who were involved in that shooting, which we know is probably likely if there are 400 bullets put in our children. So we have the technology to find out what happened to them and who they are, and to extract something from them, whether it's not, I don't know. But this is work that needs to be done. This needs a functioning Pan-African community. It needs a functioning newspaper, functioning media outlets. It needs money, resources. It needs those people in our community who have wealth to stop just to do something. This is an interesting article. This Professor Schiff's Guilt. This is an Israeli who actually wrote a novel about his ancestors, his great-great-grandfather, who he acknowledges was a slaver. I haven't read the book. I tried to read an excerpt he put on there and try to get a feel of it, but it's written in a strange first-person narrative, and he refers to himself in this bizarre way. I just couldn't process it today. I've downloaded it and saved it. You can find it online, but it's really interesting. I mean, it starts off a really amazing quote. I can't remember the name of the author, but it makes a point that there are people who are writing about Africa and using our history, and it's a kind of like colonization of our literary canon. It's kind of like, it's an interesting quote, and I'm going to kind of like ruminate over it, because I don't believe that only one group of people can write about another people's history. I'm an anthropologist. I'd be a hypocrite if I said that. I think we can write about whatever we like, but I think there is something about profiteering of this. There's something. Just I don't know. I had to read his paper. I had to read that piece I downloaded and get it. But there's something in it that sticks to my core. But I am happy. If happy is the right word. I do agree, and I do like the fact that he has dared to write this novel about his ancestors' misdeeds. I just need to check the tone. I just need to check the tenor. In the piece that I wrote, someone asked him the question, "Oh, you can make this into a movie," and I just went horrified for a second. And then he wrote something. "No, I've made lots of movies, but I don't think I'm going to do it with this one." Something like that, and that kind of like was a sigh of relief for me. But the profiteering of our history and the marginalization of African voices in telling our narrative is something that I've never been comfortable with. And we do seem to be at a point culturally where we are starting to write or rewrite the narrative. We're starting to correct it. We're starting to interject the missing pages, the bits that were deleted and erased and malformed. And so, you know, that's my take on this particular story. And I think this is the final story. This was a good news story. If, you know, I mean, all the other stories are a bit heavy. Kelly Nichols is a 34-year-old mother from Croydon, and she's taken it upon herself to devise this new game for children during the festive period to make up for, you know, kind of activities that she couldn't do. She thought a lot of the games that are around, you know, when she was young were all Eurocentric. So she decided to have something, and to create something that addresses the needs of African children. And so she's launched this monthly subscription called Woke Babies, and it includes books and a board game, and there's nothing wrong with this. This sounds like a positive story. I haven't seen the game itself, but thank you for sharing the story. And it reminds me of Nubian Jack's. That's how many of us know Nubian Jack through his amazing work with the plaques that are put up around the UK or around London, acknowledging our history. But I still have his board game because that's how I remember him starting out, was actually coming out with a board game for our families to play, and it was centered around our history, and that was amazing. And so it's good to see this tradition continuing. So that's the last slide. Let me see, I'm going to see if I can stop the share now. So thank you for listening, taking part. Yes, okay, we do that, blah, 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 blah. It's been an interesting couple of weeks. One bigger I want to do. Today I was supposed to go to help celebrate our sister Khadija George. I've just read an email that says that she has passed her doctorate of either, so she's now Dr. Khadija George, so congratulations. I am so sorry I could not make it down to celebrate with you. I had every intention, it was in my diary, but it's just been one of those weeks where, I just couldn't make it, but I will definitely catch up with you. It's amazing to have another scholar activist, warrior queen, join in making the academic world more honest. And that's what I'm going to say. And I can't wait to read your thesis, which I know is about Pan-African authors. So yes, congratulations. And thank you, all of you, for, I should make sure I can see if there's any comments, because I realize that I am still live and this thing kind of like doesn't always go. Yes, so thank you for being with me this week. Sorry for the harrowing tone. Should see you in a couple of weeks' time. Hopefully that's not, a couple of weeks' time should be before the festive period, I think. I can't do the maths. 14 plus 5, it's 19th. So yeah, around the 19th. And I won't be here. I'll be in another location once again. But hey, such is life. And as ever, I want to say, please, whatever you do, be safe, be loving, and may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us, or protect you and us. Ashe.